Chapter 4 5-3-52. The tension set in at the beginning of main day, the first numb stirrings forth by the refugees to the emergency kitchens set up on the dock, the first tentative efforts of those with papers and those without to meet with station representatives at the desks and to establish rights of residency, the first awakening to the realities of quarantine. "We should have pulled out last shift," Graff said, reviewing Dawn's messages. "Well, it was still all quiet." "Would now," Signey said, "but we can't risk Pell. If they can't hold it down, we have to. Call Station Council and tell them I'm ready to meet with them now. I'll go to them. It's safer than bringing them out on the docks." "Take a shuttle round the rim," Graff suggested, his broad face set in habitual worry. "Don't risk your neck out there with less than a full squad. They're less controlled now. All it takes is something to set them off." The proposal had merits. She considered how that timidity would look to Pell, shook her head. She went back to her quarters and put on what passed for dress uniform, the proper dark blue at least. When she went, it was with Dijans and a guard of 6 armored troopers, and they walked right across the dock to the quarantine checkpoint, a door and passage beside the huge intersection seals. No one tried to approach her, although there were some who looked as if they might want to try it, hesitating at the armed troops. She made the door unhindered and was passed through, up the ramp and to another guarded door, then down into the main part of the station. After that, it was as simple as taking a lift through the varied levels and into the administrative section, blue upper corridor. It was a sudden change of worlds, from the barren steel of the docks and the stripped quarantine area, into a hall tightly controlled by station security, into a glass-walled foyer with sound-deadening matting underfoot, where bizarre wooden sculptures met them, with the aspect of a cluster of amazed citizenry. Art. Signey blinked and stared, bemused at this reminder of luxuries in civilization. Forgotten things, rumored things, leisure to make and create what had no function but itself, as man had done but himself. She had lived her whole life insulated from such things, only knowing at a distance that civilization existed, and that rich stations maintained luxury at their secret hearts. Only they were not human faces which stared out from curious squat globes among wooden spires, but faces round-eyed and strange. Downbelow faces, patient work in wood. Humans would have used plastics or metal. There were indeed more than humans here. That fact was evident in the neat braided matting, in the bright painting which marched in alien geometries and overlays about the walls. More of the spires, more of the wooden globes with the faces and huge eyes all about them. Faces repeated in the carved furniture, and even in the doors, staring out from a gnarled and tiny detail, as if all those eyes were to remind humans that Downbelow was always with them. It affected them all. Dee swore softly before they walked up to the last doors, and officious civs let them in, walked with them, into the council hall. Human faces stared at them this time. In 6 tiers of chairs on a side, an oval table in the pit between, their expressions and those of the alien carvings remarkably alike in that first impression. The white-haired man at the end of the table stood up, made a gesture offering them the room into which they had already come. Angelo Constantine. Others remained seated, and beside the table were 6 chairs which were not part of the permanent arrangement, and 6, male and female, who were not, by their style of dress, part of the station council, or even of the beyond. Company men. Signey might have dismissed the troops to the outer chamber in courtesy to the council, rid herself of the threat of rifles and the remainder of force. She stood where she was, unresponsive to Constantine's smiles. "This can be short," she said. Your quarantine zone is set up and functioning. I'd advise you to guard it heavily. I'll warn you now that other freighters jumped without our clearance and made no part of our convoy. If you're wise, you'll follow the recommendations I made and board any incoming merchanter with security before letting it in near you. You've had a look at Russell's disaster here. I'll be pulling out in short order. It's your problem now." There was a panicked muttering in the room. One of the company men stood up. "You've behaved very high-handedly, Captain Mallory. Is that the custom out here?" "The custom is, sir, that those who know a situation handle it, and those who don't watch and learn, or get out of the way." The company man's thin face flushed visibly. "It seems we're constrained to bear with that kind of attitude. Temporarily. We need transport up to whatever exists as a border. Norway is available." She drew a sharp breath and drew herself up. "No, sir, you're not constrained, because Norway isn't available to Civ passengers, and I'm not taking any on. As for the border is wherever the fleet sits at the moment, and nobody but the ships involved know where that is. There aren't borders. Hire a freighter." There was dead silence in the hall. "I dislike, Captain, to use the word court-martial." She laughed, a mere breath. "If you company people want to tour the war, I'm tempted to take you in. Maybe you'd benefit by it. Maybe you could widen Mother Earth's sight. Maybe we could get a few more ships." "You're not in a position to make requisitions, and we don't take them. We're not here to see only what it's determined we should see. We'll be looking at everything, Captain, whether or not it suits you." She set her hands on her hips and surveyed the lot of them. "Your name, sir?" "Segust Cherryh of the Security Council, 2nd Secretary." "Second Secretary? Well, we'll see what space we come up with. No baggage beyond a duffel. You understand that? No frills. You go where Norway goes. I don't take my orders from anyone but Mazian." "Captain," another put forth, "your cooperation is earnestly requested. You have what I'll give, and not a step further." There was silence, a slow murmuring from the tiers. The man Cherryh's face reddened further, his precise dignity that instinctively galled her now further and further ruffled. "You're an extension of the company, Captain, and you hold your commission from it. Have you forgotten that?" "Third Captain of the Fleet, Mr. Second Secretary, which is military, and you're not. But if you intend to come, be ready within the hour." "No, Captain," Cherryh declared firmly. "We'll take your suggestion about freighter transport. It got us here from Seoul. They'll go where they're hired to go." "Within reason, I don't doubt." Good. That problem was shed. She could reckon Mazian's consternation at that in the midst of them. She looked beyond Cherryh at Angelo Constantine. "I've done my service here. I'm leaving. Any message will be relayed." "Captain." Angelo Constantine left the head of the table and walked forward, offered his hand, an unusual courtesy, and the stranger considering what she had done to them, leaving the refugees. She took the firm hand clasp, met the man's anxious eyes. They knew each other, remotely, had met in years past. 6 generations beyond her, Angelo Constantine, like the young man who had come down to help on the dock, a 7th. The Constantines had built Pell, were scientists and miners, builders and holders. With this man and the others, she felt a manner of bond, for all their other differences. This kind of man the fleet had for its charge, the best of them. "Good luck," she wished them, and turned and left, taking Dee and the troopers with her. She returned the way she had come, through the beginning establishment of Q-Zone, and back into the familiar environs of Norway. among friends, where law was as she laid it down, and things were as she knew. There were a few last details to work out, a few matters still to be arranged, a few last gifts to bestow on station, her own security's dredgings, reports, recommendations, a live body, and what salvaged reports came with it. She put Norway on ready then, and the siren went, and what military presence Pell had for its protection slipped free and left them. She went to follow a sequence of courses which was in her head, and of which Graf knew, her second. It was not the only evacuation in progress. The Pan-Paris station was under Kreshov's management. Sung of Pacific had moved in on Esperance. By now, other convoys were on their way toward Pell, and she had only set up the framework. The push was coming. Other stations had died, beyond their reach, beyond any salvage. They moved what they could, making Union work for what they took. But in her private estimate, they were themselves doomed, and the present maneuver was one from which most of them would not return. They were the remnant of a fleet, against a widespread power which had inexhaustible lives and supply and worlds, and they did not. After so long a struggle, her generation, the last of the fleet, the last of company power, she had watched it go, had fought to hold the two together, Earth and Union, humanity's past and future, still fought with what she had, but no longer hoped. At times, she even thought of bolting the fleet, of doing what a few ships had done and going over to Union. It was supreme irony that Union had become the pro-space side of this war, and the founding company fought against. Irony that they who most believed in the beyond ended up fighting against what it was becoming, to die for a company which had stopped caring. She was bitter. She had long ago stopped being politic in any discussion of company policies. There had been a time, years ago, when she had looked differently on things, when she had looked as an outsider on the great ships and the power of them, and when the dream of the old exploration ships had drawn her into this, a dream long revised to the realities the company captain's emblem had come to mean. Long ago, she had realized that there was no winning. Perhaps, she thought, Angelo Constantine knew the odds too. Maybe he had taken her meaning, answered it, behind the gesture of saying farewell, offered support in the face of company pressure. For a moment, it had seemed so. Maybe many of the stationers knew, but that was too much to expect of stationers. She had 3 feints to make, which would take time. A small operation, and a jump afterward to a rendezvous with Mazian on a certain date. If enough of their ships survived the initial operation, if Union responded as they hoped, it was madness. The fleet went it alone, without merchanter or stationer support, as they had gone it alone for years before.